Some of you may remember today's guest, who's appeared on LIFEOLOGY Radio twice, Karith Foster. Karith is a diversity engagement specialist whose signature programs are impacting lives at academic institutions, organizations, and corporations across America. She is also an 8-time repeat guest lecturer for the Graduate School of Business at Stanford University. Today, Karith and I talk about diversity and inclusivity, as well as a fear that most people have about what they can and cannot say. Welcome to LIFEOLOGY.
Well, thank you, James. Thank you so much for having me back. What a treat.
I was telling you the pre-call, like you just popped in my mind. I was like, I have to reach out to her. And then today you tell me, because you thought I was connecting with you because of a New York Times piece. So I want to hear more about that because I think it's a really good segue into the topic that we're talking about today.
Absolutely. So what they were covering in the New York Times piece was that corporations are now shifting from saying DEI to DEIB, right? So that they're not trading inclusion for belonging, but they're incorporating belonging into the conversation, which I think is really incredibly powerful because, when we were chatting earlier, of course, inclusivity is important, inviting people to the table, bringing, letting people have a voice. But once you invite them, how do you keep them? Well, you keep them by making them feel like they belong, like they actually are part of something, that they're not there to check a box or be, a quota. Right?
How would you say, so for individuals for the belonging piece, so would you say that would be more towards any, race differences, et cetera? How would you quantify the belonging piece for, who does this apply to rather?
Well, it applies to everyone, right? Because there's another aspect of this diversity conversation that I think gets lost sometimes. And that is that we want everybody to be on the diversity train. Right. But for so long now, DEI has been done with the focus on the marginalized groups. Right. And that's not to say that's not important. Of course it is. Yeah. But if that's the sole focus and you're excluding the people which you wish to enroll, which are the straight white males, then they don't feel like they belong either. They don't feel like they belong in the conversation. Yet you want them to get all of the concepts and grasp the ideas and figure out how to navigate that space. Yeah. But if they don't feel like they belong in it, what enrollment are you going to have? You're going to have people thinking, well, this isn't for me. I'm not diverse. Yeah. Right.
Well, what about the other? Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say it's kind of this catch-22 scenario.
Yeah. What about the individuals who are the majority in that group? And so the belonging of the people coming in, they want to feel that they do belong. But what about the individuals in the group? How do they allow the people to belong? How do they allow that? Because if there's been so much, I don't say backlash, but so much prejudice or so much being ostracized by this group, internally as a group, then to allow someone else that comes in that may be more of the majority in some ways, how do they allow them to belong, people coming in? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Well, all of this boils down to communication, right? Okay. I mean, I love the Fierce Conversations methodology. Susan, oh gosh, I'm blanking on her last name, but the woman who founded Fierce Conversations, they say the conversation is a relationship, right? And so much of this is about relationships and healthy relationships. And we have more in common than we don't. That's why I created Inversity, right? Which is my take on doing diversity, where we still acknowledge and honor the things that make us different, but we shift the focus to what is it we have in common? How can we be truly inclusive of one another, but most importantly and powerfully, introspective, right? Understanding your own value and worth so you can then see it in someone else. And so if you can come from that angle, from that perspective, without looking for perfection in someone else, by creating an awareness of the unconscious bias that comes up, and it does for every single one of us, that's when you can be really intentional about creating the spaces of belonging. And it does. It takes some effort. It takes some energy. But I don't think it's as scary as it's been made out to be.
Yeah. And I think like you and I talked about, we had a kind of conversation about stereotyping and racism back actually in, I think it was April of 2020 when COVID just happened, and all of the traumatic events that happened there for people of color. And so now I think we're on the other side of it a couple years later. I usually don't timestamp things, but we're currently in June 2023. But anyway, with that, there's a lot has changed, and there's been some regression and some evolution, and so we're really in a place where a wonderful place when it comes to inclusivity and belonging, but yet on the other side, for certain individuals, there is that devolving or de-evolution of the growth, if that makes sense. I'm trying to be very not political here as I say that.
Well, we were just talking about this, right? Like how can you say things?
Yeah,
are you allowed to say things, right? And we are in this very precarious position now where people feel like they really have to watch and monitor their words. And as someone who's for sure a free speech advocate, having been a stand-up comedian, a speaker, someone who likes to express myself, I think that's dangerous territory, because what we're doing is we're stifling people and people with great ideas, and we're not perfect. I mean, I literally wrote a book called You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy. And spoiler alert, there's no such thing as perfection, right? Yeah. Now, you can strive for excellence, as we all should, but expecting perfection, not just from ourselves, but from other people, is always going to end in disappointment. So if we can bring some grace into things, the conversation, and I know that's kind of an old school word, and people think it just has, religious, spiritual context. It doesn't. Yeah. Grace is kindness on steroids. Grace is forgiveness. Grace is allowing people to be human and to be fallible and to say, you know what, I've misspoken before. It's okay if you misspeak, but let's find a way to correct it. Let's find a way to talk through it. So we're not just automatically at each other's throats. We're not automatically demonizing someone for saying something that came off the wrong way. I think intention is certainly important. So we have to look at that. But if we don't know anyone's intention because we haven't spoken to them about it, how do we get to the bottom of it? Yeah. And a lot of times it's something that, happens. Someone says something, posts something, they knew what they meant, but other people are going to interpret it through their lens. And so the idea is giving a space for the follow-up conversation, right? If that person needs to explain themselves, for other people to express how it showed up for them. Because that person just may not have known. We don't know everything about everybody else in every other culture. And certainly we don't know everybody's experience. Right. And that's really what true diversity is. It's not just about, race or ethnicity or, sexuality and gender. It's about diversity of thought and ideas and experiences and personality types, learning types. Like there's so much, it's so juicy, and it's so sad that we've relegated it just to this one category, of these few things.
Yeah. My dad always said, we judge others by their behaviors, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. And I think that's really what you're speaking about is I know my sphere, what I mean, everything that comes along with being James. And so if I hear you say something, I'm going to judge it based off just the communication, the nonverbals, your words, and I'm going to take it and say, oh, she must have meant this because all my experience is going to influence how I see this as well. So I really appreciate you saying that, as well as the follow-up conversation or allowing a person to giving that person grace. I think that is one of the most self-evolved things someone can do, is to give someone grace.
It is. And that goes back to awareness, which is what you were just saying your father said, and what you have. And if we could all up-level our awareness, right, then we'd be in a much better situation, space to be able to address all of these things. Yeah. And it really, it takes that kind of eye-opening, that aha, that I didn't realize that before type of, think about how many things we just don't know, right? Yeah. You've probably all seen that graph of the circle of the world, the universe, right? And this is all the things there is to know. And like a dot is how much you know. And there's a sliver of like what you don't know. And then everything else is stuff you didn't know. And, I always love to, I actually have a course called the 10 E's of Awareness. Okay. And I love doing that because it's an eye opener for people, because, we think, again, we're in our own little bubble. We're in our own little world. I had a theater professor say, We are all the stars of our own one person
Yes,
play.
we are. Yes.
And we are,
Yeah.
we only know our world. But the
Yeah.
idea is, when you broaden your awareness, you're understanding the spotlight isn't just on you. You're sharing the
Mm-hmm.
stage with other people too. And it's okay to take the spotlight and put it on someone else. It's okay to see what's going on in somebody
Yeah.
else's world. Right?
Yes. I remember, I know I'm talking about my dad so much, but I remember when I was younger, well, I don't know, it was maybe 10 or 11, we would go to the mall. My mom would love to shop. And so my dad and I would sit out there and he would say, James, look at this person here. Look at that person. And he would talk about their world, for lack of better words. What do you think their life is like? What do you think they go through? And so he would just really have me think about that. So get out of my little bubble and to look at the person and without judgment, but just to say, oh, what do I see? And so in that, it was a really good, and I totally forgot about that. That's great. It's great. Unfortunately, my father passed away, but it's a great memory for me to think about now. But in that, it's such a beautiful thing because I was able to look beyond what it was obvious and just kind of sit there with them and be like, it's really interesting. All their hopes, all their joy, all their love, all their pain is contained within that person. And then they would walk on, and I'd look at someone else. And so it was really neat, really great exercise as a little boy for me.
I love that. People watching, right? One of my
Yeah.
favorite pastimes. I used to love to people watch in the airport. I still do. And when I worked in at the View in New York City many, many years ago, at lunch I would just go sit in Central Park and just people watch. And sometimes you can make up stories, but I think it is a great way to kind of get in tune with the
Yeah.
fact that we're not the only ones here. And I think that the rise of social media has been, a deterrent for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, okay, what's going on behind that screen for that other person,
Yeah.
we're just only coming from our place and our screen. And so, it's kind of, we can get into the black hole of
Mm-hmm.
vitriol and of
Yeah.
anxiety and hate, and it's a little crazy sometimes. And so
Yeah.
I always tell people, like, the last place you go for active listening is social media. Great place for
Oh my
blueberry,
God.
pancake recipes, catching up with a high school friend. Last place for
Yeah.
a political or any
Yes.
kind of debate where, you're hoping to really have a true conversation and make a point or hear another one's perspective.
That's a really good way to say that because when when you maximize your time and your energy, I always tell people, for example, if I give you 100 energy points today, how do you spend on each of those points? So at the end of the day, if you feel rested and vibrant and just had I had a really good day, a fulfilled day, that means you spent your points appropriately. But if at noon you're like, oh my God, and you get involved in something, and then at 1 o'clock you're like, I just can't do the rest of the day. Well, clearly you've misallocated or misspent those energy points. So I really like to hear how you are able to compartmentalize it and say, if I want a blueberry recipe, I'm going to go to social media. If I want a political debate, I'm going to go here. If I want a candid conversation, I'm going to go here. I think that's really important because most people don't do that. We just silo that. So everything is lumped into that silo, and that's how we become. And unfortunately, with that doesn't allow for multiple healthy opinions or just opinions in general, because if it's just one thing, that's all I have. And that's all I'm going to think about, for a child, if they're told they're stupid all the time, that's all they're going to remember. They're going to think that and think it and think it. And so it's the same type of thing. If we learn something in only one space, unfortunately, that's all we're going to think and we become that.
Yeah, you nailed it, my friend. I mean, you nailed it. That's exactly right. And that's why we do need a variety of outlets for expression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's why we need to be just very cognizant of the messaging that we're
Yeah.
giving one another and that we're
Yeah.
giving ourselves. You
Yeah.
just reminded me of the movie Pretty Woman. And I don't know if you remember that movie, but it was one of my
Yeah.
favorites growing up. And there's a scene where Julia Roberts is in bed with Richard Gere, their characters, and they're talking, and he's telling her how wonderful she is. She's obviously a former prostitute from a not so good background, and she's like,
Mm-hmm.
you're telling me how wonderful I am, but the bad stuff is easier to believe. And I think that's a default for most of us,
Yeah.
right? The
Yeah.
bad stuff is easier to believe, even if it's not just about ourselves, but about other people.
It's fair.
And so, again, so much of this, and this is where the work comes in and the energy is, how do we defy that default space? How do we look for the positive? How do we see the positive? And I see it everywhere. Now, I'm wired to. That's just my natural state. Now, I'm not
Constitution.
saying I don't have bad days and see negative things. Like I see it all the time, but I literally have tried to train my brain to look for the positives and to look for the commonalities and to look for the, the good in people, because I do believe in my heart of hearts, we're more good than bad or evil.
No, I agree.
But unfortunately, if you turn on the news, what are you going to see? Right? They operate from a place of fear. And fear is the root. Fear is the root of all evil, not money. Fear. Fear is the root of all evil.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? And because we're constantly being told, be afraid of people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who don't vote like you, who don't love like you. And so if we're operating from that place, we're destined to make everybody the enemy.
One, to go kind of piggyback off what you're saying as far as how it's easier to believe the bad stuff. In psychology, what that really boils down to is the way we process information. It's usually we process the negative. So through evolution, we're taught to look at our surroundings so we wouldn't be eaten by tigers. Caveman, tigers can eat you. And so the whole aspect of that is we constantly being hypervigilant about our surroundings. And so in that, if something happens, I am going to look for the danger. So I'm going to, quote, look for the bad, if you will. And when you think of a situation or a memory, we all will, if something annoyed us in that memory, we're going to remember what the person looked like, what they said, how you felt. I mean, it's a visceral experience. But conversely, if you think about a happy memory that you have, we just think that kind of in a cursory way, like, oh, that was really nice. That felt good. And then we move on. And so what I always try and help people do is sit with those happier moments as well and process it the same way you would process a negative memory. So when you think of the memory, use all your internal five senses. So let me look in my mind, what did I see around me in that memory? What did I hear? What did I feel on my skin? What did I smell? And so what did I taste if I ate something? So when you can really sit with that visceral experience, it starts to rewire you so you can really concentrate on that healthier version and try and decouple that focusing so much on the negative.
100%. And, I love how you put it, because you obviously are coming from the, psychoanalysis side of things. And I make a very similar reference with the university work that I do when I talk about how we're wired for survival, right? And this goes back to the cave people days. Is that a warring tribe over there? Is that a saber-toothed tiger? Is my bloodline going to continue? Am I going to be able to eat and, feed my family? It's all survival. And back then, and even now, every now and then, it feels like, is this a physical threat? But now more than ever, it's an emotional threat. Yes. Am I going to be taken out of my comfort zone because I don't know how to speak to somebody who has an alternative lifestyle from myself?
Yes. Yeah,
who,
that's fair.
Voted for the candidate that I can't stand. How am I going to navigate this space? And again, it's rooted in survival, which is based on fear. But if we can understand that, that's, I'm going to go all G.I. Joe on you. Knowing is half the battle, right?
That's funny. I wanted to transition a little bit here. So you've in the previous shows, you talked about your kids. And so how do you teach your kids inclusivity? Because your kids come from different backgrounds, for, your husband and you. How do you teach your kids inclusivity and allow them to be themselves and appreciate all their background as well as the inclusivity and belonging piece? How does that translate into your own life?
Sure. Well, I feel like, I'm doing my best to raise them the way my parents raised me. So my children are biracial. My husband's from Australia. So they're biracial, they're bicultural. Cause they speak English in Australia, but it is a totally different culture. And so, I do have to monitor their language a little bit. I'm like, y'all can't, that's a curse word here. Okay.
That's funny.
But, the way I was brought up was to be proud of, my background, my family, my heritage, but also that wasn't all that I was. There's so much more to me than my skin color. There's so much more to me than my gender. I'm a multifaceted human being with great talents and ability. And that's what I want my girls to really be rooted in. Yeah. And so, we're letting them explore different things, from activities to sports. And, I'm very, very blessed in that we live in a place that is quite diverse. It's not as diverse as New York City. And we live there sometimes, but it's still, my husband just coached one of their basketball teams. And there was a girl from Mexico. There were 2 Indian girls. There was a girl from Colombia. There was an Asian girl. There was a couple white girls. There was another Black girl. Like, it was so wonderful.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
It was literally like, kind of the Rainbow Coalition. It was like a Benetton ad. I'm totally dating myself.
I actually thought that too, United Colors of Benetton.
Right? Yeah, that was like, if you were born after 1986, you have no idea what I just said. Look it up. That's what Google's for. But it's like, and everybody, they were so good together, and they loved each other, and that the focus wasn't on their ethnicity. The focus was on being a team and learning new skills and getting the ball in the basket. And it's like, why can't we have that in a work environment too? Like, where along the way on the route to adulthood do we lose that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, thinking about that, extrovertly thinking, so processing aloud. I mean, to think about that, where did we lose it? I'm wondering if it comes down to, as when we're kids, we have all these hopes and dreams, and we think we can do anything. And then life happens, and some people go to university, some people don't. As you know, that doesn't mean intelligence, it just means education. And so people have these different aspects of their life, and so life can beat people down over and over again. So I think with that, it becomes back to that survival aspect of it. So I would think the older we get and the more life and more that life happens around us, that is going to impact how we see. So our sphere was like, I could do the world, I could do anything in the world. And then as life keeps pushing people down, and once again, that's perspective, because it doesn't mean it's pushing you down, it just means that's how you perceived it. And so that, I think, is really where a lot of people, their perception, and no judgment at all, because I know I do it at times too, but that perception of life experience now, I think, really influences how much they can give to another person, or how much they really want to give, or do they even care?
100%. So this really goes back again to the book that I wrote, You Can Be Perfect or You Can Be Happy. And, it debuted on Amazon's bestseller list under personal transformations, which I was so thrilled for, because it's not a self-help book, right? It really is about personal transformation and personal responsibility, which is what I think you were just really kind of talking about is, you're responsible for how you perceive things. You're responsible for how you see things. You're responsible for how you show up in the world. Now, that can either be a very scary thing, because it's like, wait, that's a lot on my shoulders, or it can be incredibly empowering if you realize, wait a second, I get to choose how I feel about stuff. I get to choose if I'm going to let somebody ruin my day with their ignorance or their hate or their, disassociation. I get to, you get to choose. You do. That is the power of you. And own that stuff, And I think so often we're so readily, we readily give it away. We give away our agency. We do it to medical professionals. I had a friend that just recently almost died, and this is a very wealthy friend who's very connected, has like top tier doctors, who was on a medication that was 40% higher than she should have been taking. And she's telling the doctor, I don't feel good. I don't feel right. The doctor's, no, you're fine. And that's obviously not all medical doctors. Like, I have a doctor who will sit with me for 3 hours and talk to me about what's going on. Right. But it's just, we give that agency, well, somebody else is the expert. So people know more than I do. Not all the time. Okay. Not all. Trust yourself. Trust your gut. And I think that's where we have kind of fallen off the rails a little bit. That we don't believe in ourselves. We don't have that faith. We don't give ourselves enough credit for being conscious of things, for being aware of things. And I think that certainly plays a role in the diversity space, right? Where there's some things that they're kind of off right now. But if other people are too afraid to say that, then, you don't want to be called out. You don't want to be the outlier. You don't want to get canceled, right?
Yeah, you don't.
For having an alternative thought about something. And so it's like, so we're kind of at this stalemate again, where, okay, are we going to let the fringe groups on both sides, which exist, who tend to have the loudest voices, are we going to let them run the party? Or are we going to say, wait a second, this isn't okay. There's something amiss. Let's bring it back, because this is supposed to be about us figuring out a way to get together and communicate.
Together,
and
yes.
I have a free webinar that I did called, DEI Detox. And I had another one about, when diversity goes in the wrong direction. And, the analogy I make is that people think diversity is a two-way street, and it's not. The misnomer is that again, it's just simply about ethnicity, sexuality, gender, right? And we know it's more. And the other one is the other lane is that if we do diversity well, if it's successful, then at the end, everybody agrees and we're on the same page.
That's fair. That's a good point.
That's the antithesis of true diversity.
Yes.
The idea is not to get everybody to agree. The idea is to create a space where if there is disagreement, there's still respect.
Yes.
If there is, alternate ideas, there's still value of someone else as a fellow human being.
Yes. That's where, unfortunately, we'll have to wrap up with that. But that was really, really well said. I really like how you broke that down, because you're right. I mean, even when you started to say that, I know my default when I was younger was to think that, everybody has to get along, everyone has to agree. And you're right. It's not that. It's just that respect. And so I'm really glad that you drove that home. And obviously you teach that as well. But thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I know my viewers and listeners will also really have taken so much stock of their own lives as they're hearing you speak as well. So if my viewers and listeners want to find out more information about you, Karith, and to follow you, to learn all your different programs and everything about you, where will they find this information online?
Absolutely. So I'm very fortunate. There are very few Kariths in the world. My name is Karith. And my last name is Foster. So at Karith Foster are basically all of my handles. My company is Inversity Solutions, INVERSITY solutions with an S.com. So I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, Twitter every now and then. No, it's not too hard to find me. So James, I thank you for having me back on. What a wonderful, fruitful, juicy conversation as always. And I adore you.
I had a blast as well. Thank you so much. My viewers and listeners also know that if they can't find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmiller@lifeology.com and I'll have all of Karith Foster's information there. Thank you once again.